The German East Africa campaign during World War I is one of the most unique and enduring military engagements in colonial history, primarily because of the resistance led by German General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck. Often described as a brilliant yet controversial tactician, von Lettow-Vorbeck's actions during the campaign represent a complex intersection of imperial ambition, colonial resistance, and warfare that stretched the limits of endurance, strategy, and international conflict. By the early 20th century, the German Empire, under Kaiser Wilhelm II, was actively seeking to build and maintain a colonial empire to rival those of Britain and France. German East Africa, comprising present-day Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi, was one of the most significant German colonial possessions. The colony was rich in resources and held strategic importance, stretching from the Indian Ocean to the Great Lakes region. However, the German control over East Africa was not without resistance. The indigenous populations resisted German colonial policies, particularly forced labor and harsh taxation, which led to several uprisings before World War I, such as the Maji Maji Rebellion, 1905 to 1907. Germany's entrance into World War I on the side of the Central Powers added a new dimension to the colonial struggles. Unlike in Europe, where the war was mostly a clash of major powers, in Africa, the colonial theater became a platform for European powers to attempt to outmaneuver and outcolonize each other. German East Africa became a prime target for the Allies, particularly Britain and its colonial dominions. This desire to expel Germany from its African colonies set the stage for one of the longest and most remarkable campaigns in World War I, the German East Africa Campaign. Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, the central figure of the German East Africa Campaign, was an officer in the Imperial German Army with a distinguished military background. His experience in various colonial engagements, particularly in German Southwest Africa, prepared him for the guerrilla warfare that he would later adopt in East Africa. When von Lettow-Vorbeck arrived in German East Africa in 1914, he found himself with limited resources, both in manpower and military equipment. His troops, the Schutztruppe, were a combination of German soldiers and local Askari troops, the latter being African soldiers recruited by the Germans. What von Lettow-Vorbeck lacked in numbers and modern equipment, he more than made up for in strategy and determination. From the outset, von Lettow-Vorbeck was fully aware that he had no realistic chance of winning the war outright or holding on to German East Africa indefinitely against the superior numbers and resources of the British and their allies. His primary objective, therefore, was to draw as many Allied forces away from the European front as possible, stretching British military resources and distracting them from the core theaters of the war. In this sense, von Lettow-Vorbeck's campaign became a war of attrition. One of the first significant engagements of the campaign occurred at Tanga in November 1914. The British, confident that they could easily seize German East Africa, launched an amphibious assault on the coastal town of Tanga with a substantial force. However, von Lettow-Vorbeck, with a much smaller force of German and Askari troops, managed to decisively defeat the British. His tactical ingenuity and the use of fortified defensive positions allowed his men to repel the British force, inflicting heavy casualties. The Battle of Tanga set the tone for much of the rest of the campaign. Von Lettow-Vorbeck realized that while he could not engage in prolonged direct confrontations with the British and their allies, he could use hit-and-run tactics, ambushes, and the natural landscape of East Africa to his advantage. His forces were highly mobile, and he regularly moved them through the dense forests, highlands, and valleys of the region, frustrating Allied attempts to pin him down. The German East Africa campaign under von Lettow-Vorbeck evolved into a protracted guerrilla war. While the British, supported by colonial troops from India, South Africa, and the King's African Rifles, attempted to engage von Lettow-Vorbeck in conventional warfare, the German commander evaded them at every turn. One of his greatest strengths was his ability to effectively utilize the local Askari troops. He earned the loyalty of his African soldiers, who respected his leadership and military acumen. Unlike many European commanders of the time, von Lettow-Vorbeck treated the Askari as equals, which significantly boosted morale and loyalty among his troops. Throughout the campaign, von Lettow-Vorbeck's forces lived off the land, carrying out scorched earth tactics and ambushes against the British and their allies. He cut supply lines, destroyed railways, and forced the British to commit an ever-growing number of troops to the East African front. His guerrilla tactics were not without their toll on the civilian population of the region. The war left destruction in its wake, as villages were raided for supplies, and civilians were forced to support the war effort in various ways. The campaign spanned vast areas, from the coastal regions near Dar es Salaam to the inland regions bordering modern-day Mozambique, Kenya, and Uganda. Von Lettow-Vorbeck's strategy of mobility and evasion made it nearly impossible for the British to deliver a decisive blow. Instead, they found themselves chasing him across rugged terrain, unable to decisively engage his forces in battle. His ability to evade capture became legendary, and he earned the moniker the Lion of Africa for his resistance. The British response to von Lettow-Vorbeck's campaign was to commit more troops and resources, hoping to eventually overwhelm the German forces. The British employed African colonial troops from Kenya, South Africa, and even as far as India to hunt down von Lettow-Vorbeck. However, this was easier said than done. Von Lettow-Vorbeck's knowledge of the terrain, combined with his hit-and-run tactics, meant that the British and their allies often found themselves chasing shadows. They suffered heavy losses from disease, heat, and constant ambushes by von Lettow-Vorbeck's forces. By 1916, the British had launched a series of coordinated attacks aimed at cutting off von Lettow-Vorbeck from the interior of German East Africa. They sought to push him towards the southern regions, where they hoped to deliver a decisive blow. The Belgian forces also launched operations from the Congo, attempting to pressure von Lettow-Vorbeck from west. Yet even as von Lettow-Vorbeck retreated deeper into the heart of the colony, he continued to fight back fiercely. Despite being outnumbered and outgunned, his troops remained highly disciplined and mobile. The Allied forces became increasingly frustrated with the situation. Despite their numerical superiority, they found themselves unable to decisively end the campaign. The vast distances, difficult terrain, and von Lettow-Vorbeck's resilience meant that the war dragged on for years, tying down British and Allied resources that could have been used in other theaters of the war. As the war in Europe neared its conclusion in 1918, von Lettow-Vorbeck remained undefeated in the field. His forces had been reduced to a shadow of their former size, and many of his troops were suffering from disease and malnutrition. Yet, even with the war turning against Germany on the European front, von Lettow-Vorbeck refused to surrender. He continued his campaign, moving into Portuguese East Africa, modern-day Mozambique, and conducting raids there. His mobility allowed him to stay one step ahead of the Allies, even as their numbers continued to grow. It was only after the armistice of November 11, 1918, which ended the war in Europe, that von Lettow-Vorbeck finally agreed to surrender. At that point, he had led his troops for more than 4 years without being decisively defeated in battle. His formal surrender took place in northern Rhodesia, present-day Zambia, on November 25, 1918, making him the last German commander to surrender in World War I. Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck's campaign in German East Africa left a profound legacy, both in terms of military history and the impact on the region itself. His use of guerrilla tactics and unconventional warfare was ahead of its time, prefiguring many of the insurgencies and resistance movements that would emerge in the 20th century. In Germany, von Lettow-Vorbeck was celebrated as a hero, particularly among nationalist and military circles. His undefeated status became a symbol of German resilience, even in the face of overwhelming odds. However, the campaign also had devastating consequences for the people of East Africa. The war ravaged the region, leading to widespread destruction, famine, and disease. The scorched earth tactics used by both sides decimated local agriculture, leaving the population struggling to survive. The war also reinforced European colonial dominance, as the British took over German East Africa, renaming it Tanganyika and incorporating it into their empire. In conclusion, the German East Africa campaign stands as a testament to the enduring nature of resistance and the complexities of colonial warfare. Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck's campaign, while militarily impressive, was part of a broader story of colonial exploitation and resistance, one that shaped the future of East Africa long after the guns fell silent.